Good evening and welcome to episode 18 of Coffee Chatter. Sorry it's so late, but here we go anyway. First off, TV show cast cancels their own show. A few weeks after the return of one of their cast members from a network-ordered suspension, the cast of Duck Dynasty has decided to cancel their own show, according to an Xfinity Entertainment article. According to the article, the cast decided they no longer wanted to deal with the drama of the A&E network, and allegedly set a series date finale. Although oddly enough, I can't find the article anymore. I've also searched online and searches seem to say the opposite, that commercial sponsors are soaring and being more supportive than ever of the show. Also in news, Dancing with the Stars, there's a new rumor going around that both of the male judges will be leaving. However, I have not seen anything positive and nothing is official until they announce it themselves. Just keep an eye for that. Also, Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney have just announced that they will reunite and perform at the Grammys. So be on the lookout for them on January 26th during the Grammy show. Next up, top controversial TV series. WMUR recently released a slideshow of the top controversial reality series on TV. Are you surprised by any of these making the list? What reality shows do you think should be on the controversy list? Please note that these are reality series, not competition shows such as Dancing with the Stars, American Idol, or Biggest Loser, although they did cause a controversy this season. First off comes the TLC show Sister Wives, a show that follows a family believing in polygamy, which means marrying more than one wife at once. They made the controversy list due to the nature of their show, many of which feel is against values and not something that should be on a family-friendly station such as TLC. Next on the list is MTV's Jersey Shore. This show followed 8 housemates as they lived, worked, and played on the Jersey Shore. While it sounds like a simple, mindless series, it has been knocked through the controversy ringer because of its excessive drinking, language, and also due to their numerous reference to Italians by using the term Guido. Not surprisingly, the next show is Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Although it is a good show that sees no signs of being canceled, many feel simply that the family is not worth following. My personal opinion is that they're too dramatic and almost fake to be viewed as a family. The only one from the pack that I actually like is Kris Jenner. She's been through a lot, yet still at least tries to keep the wacky family together. Toddlers and Tiaras is next on the reality series list, and rightfully so. This show demonstrates the lives of young toddlers that are forced into beauty pageants at a young age. It shows the very demanding schedule and lifestyle these tiara tots need to follow each day and the obvious drama between parents. I think that the decision to enter these pageants should be made by the child, not the parent. If the daughter is really interested in competing and wants to, then she should. But the minute the child tells her parents she's no longer interested or no longer wants to compete, the decision should be made immediately to pull her from the roster. Here Comes Honey Boo Boo follows Toddlers and Tiaras, and rightly so. After all, Honey got her own start on the show before being given her own show, which follows her and her weird family through their daily life. The controversy with this show is that the family seems to have no common sense or care for any of them or themselves. Honey Boo Boo and her family should all be on a diet or at least trying to get some form of exercise. But instead, none of them feel the need and watch themselves get bigger and bigger. On live TV, no less. The way they live their lives makes a lot of watchers mad, yet they still tune in. I guess that's the deal with reality TV. It's so dumb that you can't stop watching it. MTV made the list twice with their show Buckwild, which showcased the lives of 9 adults living in West Virginia. Many people frowned upon this show, even the West Virginia governors, who felt that they were showing West Virginia in a negative way. The show was canceled after the death of one of their cast members this past year. Are You Hot? The Search for America's Sexiest People is or was a show So stupid, I haven't even heard of it. Clearly, it's on a station that I don't get. The show followed the concept of any competition show involving judges. The judges would evaluate each contestant based on their physical appearance. It was not well received by the viewers, especially because of the judges often giving degrading negative comments to contestants. The show was eventually canceled. Go figure. Another strike for MTV. Their hit show Teen Moms is hitting the gossip mill because critics say they are over-glamorizing teen motherhood and making it seem as if it's a great life and not focusing on the hardships of being a teen mother. Many people also claim the stars of the show have criminal records. Let's face it, what reality star doesn't have a criminal record of some kind? The show has been on MTV since 2011. Oxygen made its debut to the controversy list with their show Preachers of LA, which is looked down upon because of its extreme rich view of the preachers, which is not what their lives are really like, nor should they be. TLC returns to the list with John and Kate Plus 8. While the show is currently only known as Kate Plus 8 due to their divorce, the whole show in general is a controversial subject. Many feel that the parents were just doing the series for attention, which Kate seems to continue wanting. John was not very helpful with the children, mainly because whatever he did or suggested, Kate overruled. The show was just odd to me all around. I quickly watched Ghost Adventures and turned it off within the first few seconds, so that's my review for that show. It sucks. It was extremely staged, like worse off than others that I've seen. And it just didn't make any sense to me. So don't watch Ghost Adventures. Maybe you like it. I couldn't get into it. Next, we have a book review. I finished yet another book. And it's another mediumship book. The Medium Next Door by Maureen Hancock. Similar to the last book I read, this is a book of another medium's journey through life and the afterlife. This one, however, pertains more to me than the last, as this medium is still a practicing Catholic who uses her God-given gift to help others heal. As a matter of fact, her parish priest lets her do healing services once a month, kind of like what Sacred Heart has, only she, it's a mass first, and then instead of prayer teams, she goes through and connects people with their deceased relatives, which I think is a really cool concept and a very healing concept. In the back of her book, Maureen answers questions from her fans, and one of the questions was about the Catholic faith not believing in mediums. Here is her answer, taken from page 261. On occasion, while in a session, a client might say that their mother or father wouldn't come through because it's against their religion. I myself was raised Irish Catholic, and I'm still Irish and practicing Catholic. My faith allows me to deliver messages of hope, peace, and unconditional love from the higher side of life. I see nothing but beautiful healing occur after a connection to heaven, and that's anything but evil. To quote St. Paul about the gifts of the Holy Spirit, there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. For to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, to another the word of knowledge, through the same Spirit, to another faith, by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healings, by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit works all of these things, distributing to each one individually as he wills. This comes from direct quote from the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 11. I believe the Lord gives each of us special gifts through the Holy Spirit. These gifts are bestowed in many forms. Mediumship is the gift of prophecy. Throughout the Old and the New Testaments, God has always communicated to his people through mediumship. This communicating manifested through many forms: angels, visions, the so-called dead, or dreams. The birth of Jesus and John the Baptist were prophesied by angels, speaking from the voice of God. John the Baptist prophesied the coming of the Messiah. See John chapter 1, verses 5 through 9. Mediumship is acknowledged through supernatural and miraculous happenings, upon which most, if not all, Christian teachings are based. God is present and active in all of my gifts. I'm sure some of my close-minded Catholic friends will argue endlessly with me on this subject, and this is me speaking, not Maureen. But when you read into the scripture passage Maureen mentions, and you have a little bit of common sense, you can see where she is going. I myself feel it's the mediums that charge unthoughtful amounts of money for a reading that you need to look out for. For example, one nationally known medium, who I will not name, charges over $1,000 for just one reading, and only an hour's worth. Some mediums do charge money because they have chosen to go into the business full-time, such as Teresa Caputo, who also has a book out that I will read later. I do not plan to use my gifts as a career, nor do I plan to have my powers on at all times, only when a spirit has a really important message to deliver. Also, watch videos on YouTube of the medium in question. When you watch a clip of Char or John, for example, you will see they really do not have any emotional attachment to their clients or the person being read. John, I do not like at all, as a matter of fact, because he becomes a little overly sarcastic in his readings, to the point of almost poking fun at the person he's reading if he or she doesn't understand a connection right away. For example, in one of his clips on YouTube, he was asking this client of his what the significance of the number 7 was. And at first it didn't click with her, so he just kept going over and over and over with other things. And finally, when he said it again, what's your connection with the number 7? She's like, well, 7 is the month of July. My loved one passed away in July. And he was like, would somebody smack her? You know, see, sometimes our minds just don't connect. And he's playing off of our stupidity or our blonde moment at that moment. And that's not right. Teresa and Maureen, on the other hand, connect with their clients and those they read, and actually break down and cry with them when needed. Teresa does this a lot. If you watch YouTube clips of her show, Long Island Medium, there'll be moments where she'll be delivering a message and she'll just start to cry. It shows that they care about that person. I have already given readings to 2 of my friends that went successfully, and will continue to do so as the spirits allow. Next up, I brought back Paranormal Corner because my sister found a link online that talks about the top 10 most scariest places in the United States. But what I did was I built on those 10 and added some others that I also came in contact with. So if you're into ghosts, you might want to come and check out some of these areas. First stop, the Moundsville Penitentiary in Moundsville, West Virginia. During its more than 100 years in operation, the Moundsville Penitentiary in West Virginia was one of America's most violent correctional facilities and the final stop for almost 1,000 criminals. The prisoners lived in cramped quarters, which led to riots. Many men were hung or killed in the electric chair, while others were murdered by other prisoners. The prison closed in 1995, but according to some, the tortured spirits are still behind bars and in the bowels of the prison, and may be seen or heard on a tour. The ghost of a maintenance man who was stabbed to death by prisoners in the basement for telling the guards on them. The circular entrance gate still turns on its own, eternally bringing in prisoners to the facility. Areas where paranormal activity have been reported most common include the Sugar Shack, an indoor area used when the outdoor exercise yard could not be used, Death Row, the shower cages, and the North Wagon Gate, where prisoners were held before execution in the days previous to the electric chair. Other reported activity includes phantom footsteps, which means that you hear footsteps but there's nobody behind you, disembodied voices, screams, crying, pleading, banging, and other loud noises, light anomalies, which means the light flickers or the light doesn't look right on your camera, extreme feeling of unease, and being watched and laughing. While we're still in West Virginia, we might as well check out another paranormal hotspot, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. Once known as the Weston State Hospital, this asylum was home to thousands of people with mental illness, starting in 1864. Hundreds of people died here before the facility closed in 1994. Spirits are said to haunt the building and grounds today, dating back to the Civil War era when the asylum's grounds served as a military post. Paranormal tours of the facility feature 2-hour visits to the asylum's 4 main hotspots. The more intense ghost hunt is an 8-hour overnight paranormal adventure with experienced ghost hunting guides. Yet another hospital built on Kirkbride design, see Danvers State Hospital. This structure was built between 1858 to 1881 and opened its doors to patients in 1864. Construction was halted by the outbreak of the Civil War when the money put aside for the construction was stolen after it was demanded by the state of Virginia after the West Virginia secession, and an attempt was made to use it to finance a pro-northern state's government in Virginia. The money was eventually recovered and construction began again after West Virginia was officially recognized as a U.S. state. The name of the hospital was changed to Weston State Hospital in 1913. As well, many of its contemporaries, this hospital quickly became dangerously overcrowded. The original design had been for 250 patients, yet by 1880 it held over 700 patients, then 1,600 in 1938 and 1,800 in 1949. The population was made up mostly of epileptics, drug addicts, and the mentally handicapped. Some parts of the hospital had limited lighting, heating, and furniture, while others, such as a rebuilt wing after a patient set afire, were almost luxurious. Charles Manson was even a patient here for a short stay. Again, like many of its contemporaries, as in the 80s began to roll around and attitudes toward the mentally ill changed, the population began to decline. For example, epileptics that they mentioned earlier was part of this place. They can now live normal lives. And, they're out in the world, they work, they go to church, they're normal. They're not considered mental anymore. Eventually, it was decided to turn the hospital into a state prison and build a new hospital. The new hospital was built in Weston, but in the end of the old facility was simply closed. The doors were shut in May of 1994. Since its closure, there have been many plans for the old hospital, including turning it into a golf course, and eventually 2 museums were built inside the main building, but both were closed down due to fire code violations. In 2007, the building was bought by an asbestos contractor for almost $2 million, and the grounds are now used for events such as county fairs. That's kind of creepy. Tours are also offered of the facility, built both in the daytime and at night, as well as overnight stays can be booked for Saturday nights. A lot of places advertise themselves as the most haunted place in the United States or North America. This is the one location that doesn't need to advertise, apparently. This is the only location where we have found reports by actual investigators that make this claim. Reported activity includes shadow figures, partial and full body apparitions, mainly partially inside of walls, of both patients and staff, disembodied voices, screams, laughter, crying, calls for help, mysterious myths, light issues, and phantom footsteps, feelings of being watched and not wanted, EVP warning people to go home or leave. An EVP is a voice that you can hear off of a radio or scanner that sometimes comes through on scanners or systems that you can listen to, voice recorders and such like that. Response to knocks, windows, and doors opening and closing on their own, touches and pushes, sound of breathing, and so on and so on. If you want to experience the paranormal, this location should be on your list. Now, we're moving on to Iowa, where we will visit the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa. On June 10, 1912, the old white frame house at 508 East 2nd Street became a grisly crime scene. The heinous murder of Josiah B. Moore, his wife, their 4 children, and 2 young girls, who were overnight guests, rocked the small town of Valeska, Iowa, and the murderer was never identified. Over the years, residents of the home reported visions of a man with an axe, children crying, and unexplained paranormal activity. In 1994, the home was restored to its original condition with no indoor plumbing or electricity. These touches add to the chilling ambience during a lamplight tour from April through November, or an overnight experience available by reservation for groups. Next, we head over to warm, cozy Arizona, where we may encounter the spirit of Sammy Jean. She is found in Jerome, Arizona. Jerome, Arizona is a former copper mining town with a paranormal reputation that dates back to the Wild West. The town is now home to just 400 residents, down from 15,000 in its heyday. But legend has it there are plenty more ghostly residents from the days of mining accidents and shootout gunfights. One well-known spirit is the working girl Sammy Jean, a prostitute who was strangled by a customer in the old Crib district. Her beautiful spirit roams the alleys looking for her killer who was never found. Next up is the Cuban Club in Tampa, Florida. Cuban Club, also known as Sirocco Cubano de Tampa, can be found in Tampa's Ybor City neighborhood. In 1917, this spot was a popular hangout for Cuban immigrants who enjoyed the ballroom, outdoor band shell, and cantina with a stage and dance floor. Today, the compound, protected by the National Historic Register, hosts concerts and special events and is the settling for many ghost stories and about spirits playing the piano and riding the elevators. Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is next on the list. Built in 1771, Fort Mifflin is the country's only Revolutionary War battlefield that is still intact. There are 14 restored buildings on the grounds on the Delaware River and reportedly plenty of spirits from the past. Amongst the ghosts said to haunt the fort are a screaming woman whose cries are so loud that the Philadelphia police have been called to investigate, only to find no one there. Other characters in the local ghost stories include a faceless man wandering around the fort, excellent, a tour guide dressed in Revolutionary garb, and numerous children and dogs. The Manhattan Bistro is located in New York, New York. Soho is one of Manhattan's hipster havens with trendy shops and gourmet restaurants. But you may get more than you planned for at dinner at the Manhattan Bistro, which is at 129 Spring Street, a French restaurant with a notable ghost. Juliana Elmore Sands was killed in this building in 1799 when she was thrown into a well in the basement. According to some ghost stories, her spirit, often called the ghost of Spring Street, manifests itself as vapor rising from the kitchen floor and causes front of the house mischief with flying ashtrays and shattered dishes. The Moon River Brewery in Savannah, Georgia is next. The Moon River Brewery brought its beloved beers to Savannah in 1999, but the building is one of the oldest in town, dating back to 1821. In its original incarnation, it was the City Hotel, a high-end hotel with a history of violence during the Civil War. Men were killed in the hotel during heated skirmishes, including a Yankee who was beaten to death by locals in 1860. Some bar patrons today say they've seen bottles mysteriously fly throughout the air and have witnessed guests being pushed, touched, and even slapped by unseen forces. One resident apparition, Toby, is sent to skulk around the billiard room looking for the next great bar brawl. Next, let's take off to New Orleans, Louisiana, where we'll visit the Sultan's Palace. The house at 716 Daphne Street is a classic French Quarter beauty with classic wrought iron balconies and a large courtyard. But in the 1800s, this residence was a house of horrors for the Sultan, a wealthy man with a deprived lifestyle, multiple wives and children, and a harem of women and young boys held against their will. Neighbors complained about the mysterious habits of this man who had a prediction for partying. opium, and torture. But the greatest mystery in the house was the Sultan's demise, when he was buried alive in the courtyard after his family and harem were hacked to pieces in a bloodbath by an unknown perpetrator. Today, his angry spirit is thought to be responsible for the unusual noises, loud music, and strong incense smells that waft from the home, as well as unwelcomed advances on past female residents who swear the Sultan is still up to his old tricks of groping female visitors. While still in Louisiana, Lake Charles will find Calasio Courthouse. Tony Joe Henry has been the talk of the small town of Lake Charles since the 1940s, when she killed a man in cold blood. Just as notorious were her stunning good looks. The former prostitute charmed a gentleman in a pickup truck to give her a ride while she was walking the highway with a friend en route to spring her true love from a Texas prison. It took 3 trials for a jury to convict the Willie Tony Joe, who had charmed the courtroom and jail staff and divided the town over her presumed guilt. In 1942, this murderous beauty, known as Tiger Girl, was the first female to die in the electric chair in the state. Her spirit lingers in the courthouse today, and workers there swear they feel her presence, hear her screams, and even smell her burning hair. Many believe that she tinkers with office equipment, locks doors, and meddles with everyday office life at the courthouse. Next, we finally head over to Kentucky for my area of expertise, cemeteries. In Marion, Kentucky, we'll find an abandoned cemetery known as Baker Hollow Road Cemetery. While there is no history on the actual cemetery, there have been plenty of paranormal experiences recorded. This location is only for experienced paranormal investigators. Novices and beginners should seriously keep their distance. Even for experienced investigators, it is advised that you stay in your car with the doors locked and the windows up. The experience will be intense enough, even sealed up like this. It is said that the easiest way to know that you have found this cemetery is the overwhelming empathetic sense of sorrow you will feel. Some people have reduced to uncontrollable sobbing. The entities here are not friendly and are more than happy to let visitors know this. A phantom dog is said to guard the cemetery and is usually seen limping or otherwise seeming to be injured. This is a ruse and used to get people out of their cars and to approach it. If this rouse doesn't work, the dog, which is said to have burning yellow eyes, will keep pace with your car no matter the speed until you reach the fork in the road. Again, witnesses who have approached the dog have been physically attacked. The apparitions of Civil War soldiers still locked in battle have been seen here. Phantom faces have appeared right next to car windows coming out of mist that suddenly spring out of nowhere. Invisible forces have attacked the living, resulting in bites, scratches, and cuts. Unlocked car doors have been opened by invisible presences, and there have been reports of attempts to pull people out of their cars. Cars have also suffered damage here, including dents and scratches on the windows. Cars have also stalled here, resulting in great difficulty in getting them started again. The ghosts of loved ones who have passed away have been seen begging people to get out of their cars and follow them. This would seem to be dark entities with the ability to pull images out of people's minds and project them. There are also reports of the trees being filled with dead men hanging from nooses. Phantom noises echo through the area, including screams, yells, cries, and voices. Scenes of horrific car accidents have been played out for witnesses, with the ghosts of the victims rising immediately and approaching the witnesses' cars. Sudden and abrupt weather changes have been reported, including pouring rain to clear skies or vice versa. The things that call this cemetery home are very aggressive, and it is suggested that you show no fear and only come to this area fully protected and shielded. People who go unprepared have suffered crippling panic attacks, physical illness, and terrible nightmares. It is said that everyone experiences something different here, but very few leave untouched. Spooky. The next haunted location takes us all the way north to Connecticut. The Old Norwich State Hospital in Preston. Opened in 1904 and closed with a reduced staff in 1996. This site expanded from 1 building on 100 acres to 30 buildings on over 900 acres. It housed the mentally ill as well as the criminally insane. During its operational years, at different times, TB patients, geriatric patients, and chemically dependent patients were also housed here. It is still owned by the state, although the town of Preston is responsible for a large part of the former campus. There are many rumors of patients being mistreated to the point of torture here. Apparitions of children, former patients, and staff. Intense cold spots have been felt on even the warmest summer days. Phantom voices, moaning and mumbling, have been heard. Phantom beats have been heard in the room where lobotomies were once performed. One room in particular, the sound of a woman crying has been heard. Other activity includes phantom footsteps, phantom screams, faces seen in windows, doors opening and slamming on their own, objects moving and falling on their own, light issues, mysterious mist with human faces within, shadow figures, whispers of people's names, reports of being touched and poked by unseen forces, general feeling of unease and extreme fright and a feeling of not being wanted. Here is a testimonial from the website monitor I got my information from. I recently spoke with someone who lives only a few blocks from this location over the phone. And this is not me, this is the website that I got the information from. They wish to remain anonymous, but did provide some up-to-date details for anyone wishing to investigate this site. The former hospital grounds are definitely owned by the city of Norwich. The site is currently surrounded by a fence and patrolled 24 hours a day by a security force. The reason for the fence and security is the large amount of vandalism done to the property since the closure of the hospital. The only way to enter the grounds without incurring a trespassing charge, at the very least, is to gain permission from the city. They describe the grounds as still very beautiful, sitting on a hill beside the river. The old Victorian buildings are suffering from neglect, but still remain an awesome sight. Photos and video can still be taken from the public side of the fence, and most windows in the buildings are open, in which items belonging to both the staff and the patients are still visible. Anyone with the financial ability to redevelop the site is encouraged to contact the city with their plans. Most of the old buildings have large amounts of asbestos in their roofs, and therefore any cleanup would need to remove this poisonous substance at a very large financial commitment. There have been plans submitted to the city, including one for an amusement park, but none have been able to bring the cash needed for the large undertaking. Heading back to Philadelphia, we find the Eastern State Penitentiary. Opened on October 25, 1829, this site was the world's first true penitentiary. When it was first constructed, it was the world's biggest and most expensive public structure ever made. Its unique wagon wheel design became the model for more than 300 prisons constructed worldwide. Each prisoner was incarcerated separately, and the warden had to visit each one of them at least once a day. The overseer had to see each one 3 times a day. The cells possessed only one skylight as the eye of God above the prisoner, and they were exercised separately, as well as with high walls preventing any prisoner communication. Prisoners were not allowed visits from their friends or families, but several distinguished guests were allowed to tour the prison and speak with the prisoners. Eventually, this system would collapse due to overcrowding. The prisoners were put through what we would now call torture to assume they were penitent for their crimes. These included being drenched with freezing water outside in the winter, chaining their tongues to their wrists and putting them in a pit with little food, no light, and no human contact for as long as 2 weeks. In 1966, the prison was dedicated as a historical landmark. It was closed and abandoned in 1971 before being bought by the city, hoping to build a mall or apartment complex within the walls. These dreams did not come to fruition, though. The property sat abandoned while trees grew in the cell blocks, and the site became a home for the city's stray cat population. In 1998, In 1988, a petition was granted to halt any redevelopment plans, and in 1994, the prison reopened to the public and historical tours were given. This location has been featured on MTV's Fear, the Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters, and TLC. EVPs reacting to actions being taken by living visitors, feelings of being watched and not wanted, people have pushed, tugged, and grabbed, apparitions of former inmates and guards, including a guard who stands eternally at his post in a watchtower, light issues, mysterious mists, disembodied voices, far-off ghostly laughter in cell block 12. Al Capone was a prisoner and complained of nightly visits of one of his victims. Shadow figures. Figures have been seen darting from one cell to another, phantom footsteps and sounds of screaming and crying have all been reported. Next, we head south to Florida, where we will find the Spanish Military Hospital Museum, also known as Our Lady of Guadalupe Hospital or Royal Hope Hospital. It is located in St. Augustine. In the early 18th century, the Spanish military built a hospital at this location. In 1821, that building was torn down so work could be done on the water pipes, bringing water up into the city. When the building was demolished and they began to dig, they made a terrible discovery. Thousands of human bones were buried under the hospital. Through research in modern times, it has been discovered that these remains belonged to the Temucan people who occupied the area before the Europeans invaded. It is believed that the Spaniards built their hospital right over a Temucan burial ground. In the typical fashion of the settlers, the water pipes were laid and another replica building was constructed, which still stands today. The building continued its use as a military hospital and treated casualties from both the Seminole and Civil Wars. Today, this building is a museum bringing back the days when it functioned when the Spanish ran it. It is also considered one of the most haunted buildings in the world. The tales of hauntings go all the way back to when it was a Spanish military hospital. Patients and staff constantly complained of an evil presence that hung over the buildings. This was blamed on the feelings of death that filled the location. This presence is still felt today and thought to be the ghost of the Native Americans whose graves were just desecrated. Tons of EVPs have been captured here. Many witnesses have been scratched, bitten, punched, pushed, and prodded. Objects have moved and/or shaken with no perceived cause. Light issues and unexplained mists have been seen and/or photographed. In the former mourning room where the dead were brought to be blessed and visited by family, phantom cries and screams are heard, and the conversations by disembodied voices are heard talking and praying. The imprints of bodies are frequently seen on the beds kept by the museum. There is also a power emphatic sense of desperate despair and remorse. Patches of intensely cold air have also been felt in this room. The mourning room is now what we would call the morgue. In the ward where the sick were left to die, and also where patients were operated on with primitive or no anesthetic, misty apparitions have been seen here, and objects have moved on their own. The beds in this room have jumped out suddenly and hit people walking by. One apparition flashed by a witness before coming right up to them and looking them in the eyes and disappearing. In the surgeon's office, the museum has an exhibit of the tools used in early surgery. Unexplained sounds and bangs are heard here. Objects move and shake on their own. There have also been some incidents where people were grabbed by unseen presences and not let go of until they exited the room. In the apothecary medicines were once dispensed, unexplained shadows crawl across the walls. At least one person was completely enveloped by an unseen presence. The phantom sounds of a man crying are frequently heard. This would be your pharmacy. Heading back to Kentucky in Louisville, we find Waverly Hills Sanitarium. Located in Louisville, Jefferson County, Kentucky, this Tuberculosis Sanatorium was originally opened in 1910 as a two-story hospital with room for only 40 to 50 patients. In 1912 and 1916, respectively, a hospital for abandoned cases and a children's pavilion were opened, increasing the patient capacity to 130 patients. In October of 1926, the five-story building that still stands was opened. It was closed in June of 1962 as the advent of antibiotics had lowered tuberculosis cases in the country. The building was reopened later in 1962 as the Woodhaven Geriatrics Hospital, but was closed again in 1981 due to numerous allegations of patient abuse. Plans since then for the site have included turning it into a minimum security prison and a plan to build the world's largest statue of Jesus Christ on the site. In 2001, the current owners of the property, Gina and Charlie Mattingly, purchased the property. They now run the site as a haunted attraction, including ghost and historical tours. The building and property are private property, and the owners have installed many security features, including a 24-hour volunteer security force and internal-external cameras. Should you decide to visit this location, it would be a wise decision to book a tour instead of trying your own exploration. Plan for it in advance, though, as at the time of this posting, the website's posting, they were booked through 2009 on all tours except the 2-hour Ghost Historical Tour. That's right, all full night and half night tours are booked. Hence the fact that Haunted North America Investigations is planning a tour there in 2014. As this is quite simply one of the most famous haunted locations on Earth, definitely the most haunted in the United States, its legends are many. The location has been visited and investigated on such TV shows as Scariest Places on Earth, VH1 Celebrity Paranormal Project, Ghost Hunters, and Most Haunted. Over 63,000 people died at Waverly, and some of them still walk the halls and grounds. Room 502. The legend is of 2 suicides that happened in this room. One of a nurse that jumped from the window with no other details. The other of a nurse that hung herself from a fixture in the room. Supposedly she was pregnant out of wedlock, possibly by a doctor who then flubbed the abortion. This hanging has been verified by a former employee. The draining room. Warning very explicit. This room was located near the morgue. It was used by the staff to drain fluids from the corpses in order to make them lighter for transport. They would hang the bodies from poles and then split the bodies from sternum to groin to drain all the fluids. This was to prevent infection to the general population. This legend is supposedly untrue, and the room was actually used for a transformer. However, it still strangely is reported as paranormally active. The Death Tunnel, A500, a 500-foot tunnel constructed from the main floor of the hospital to railroad tracks at the bottom. The trains were used to haul away the bodies for burial by their loved ones. One side of the tunnel was constructed with a stairway to allow entrance and exit by the staff. A motorized cart was used to move the bodies. Urban legends have had it that the bodies were simply tossed down the tunnel to let gravity take them to the bottom. This is untrue and inhumane. The tunnel was constructed to hide the release of the dead from the patients. At the time, there was no cure for TB, so the patients were given lots of fresh air and sunlight and hope for a recovery. Seeing the dead leaving the hospital would have been hard on morale. This area has also reported a high level of activity. Timmy, the ghost of a small boy who roams the halls. He likes to play games with visitors, including hide and seek and playing with a ball. People have reported cold spots and physical touching of their hands in Timmy's presence. An elderly lady. A ghost of an elderly woman reportedly chained and bleeding, running from the front door screaming help. This ghost is probably from the time the building was used as a geriatric hospital. More hauntings include the shadow people and orbs, crossing rooms and moving down hallways. Many different examples of EVPs, including Get Out and What Kind of Hospital Is This? Thermal imaging equipment was used on at least one occasion on Halloween 2006, and the image of two small children is seen rising from the hallway floor and disappearing through a wall. The next place on our stop is actually a historic landmark, the Sloss Furnaces National Historic Landmark in Birmingham, Alabama. Construction was began on this site in 1880 by James Withers Sloss. 2 furnaces were built and were first fired up on April 1882. 24,000 tons of high-quality iron were produced that first year. In 1886, Sloss sold the company to a group of investors who would completely modernize the plant over the next 40 years. The property was sold and resold a few times over the next few decades before restrictions from federal laws and the lack of usable metal in the Birmingham area forced the shutdown of the site. The site was donated to the Alabama State Fair Authority for redevelopment into an industrial museum. This was decided to be unfeasible due to the condition of the property, and plans were made to demolish the site. Local citizens lobbied for the preservation of the site, and in the late 70s, the voters of Birmingham elected to have the city spend billions to refurbish the site. Today, Sloss is a National Historic Landmark and is also a part of a linear park that runs through the city. Every Halloween, the Sloss Fright Furnace is held. Working conditions at the furnaces were brutal and extremely dangerous. Several hundred men died while on the job at this location. The apparition of a worker named Theophilus Jowers, who slipped and fell into the furnace, is still seen walking the catwalks and otherwise fulfilling his duties to this day. The apparition of James Wormwood is also seen on the top of the tallest furnace, where he died, as well as throughout the property. It is said that as a foreman, he treated his workers horribly and forced them to work in extremely dangerous conditions, resulting in many deaths. Wormwood did not normally work up on the highest furnace, so it is speculated that in fact his death resulted from some of his workers throwing him into the furnace. Many other apparitions of former workers are seen all over the property, in reports that date back to before the site was closed down. Phantom voices, bangs, breathing, and screams are reported frequently. People have been touched, pushed, pulled, and physically attacked at the site as well. Other activity includes light issues, mysterious mist, electronic disturbances, so like your cell phone may just randomly die, or your camera may freeze, shadow figures, feelings of unease, being watched and not being wanted, and cold and hot spots. Next, we return to New York, this time in Bethany, where we find the Rolling Hills Asylum. Rolling Hills Asylum, located in western New York, 40 minutes from 2 major airports. Rolling Hills Asylum is a hotbed of paranormal activity. Disembodied voices, doors slamming, footsteps, sounds of furniture moving, full-body apparitions, shadow people, touching, lots of Class A EVPs, and more. The property was established on January 1st, 1827, as the Genesee County Poor Farm. Over the years, it has operated as a poor farm, infirmary, orphanage, TB hospital, nursing home, and more. Residents and inmates ran the gambit of widows, orphans, disabled, mentally unstable, murders, and more. Over 1,700 bodies buried in unmarked graves. Come out and investigate this very haunted and active location. It is open year-round. Historical and flashlight tours, public and private ghost hunts, daytime and nighttime opportunities, special events, and more. They have been featured on Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures, oh go figure, and Paranormal Challenge, as well as Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters. Their website is rollinghillsasylum.com. It was opened in 1927 in response to a government directive that all municipalities had to have facilities designed to take care of people who were incapable of taking care of themselves. The facility was known as the Genesee County Poorhouse and took patients ranging from drunks to unwed mothers to outright criminals. It became a working farm with over 200 acres, and every able-bodied person was expected to work. The county was responsible for burying those who had no family, and a graveyard does exist on the property, but the exact location has been lost as time went by. The facility was closed in 1974, with the patients being relocated to Batavia. By that time, the building had served as both an insane asylum and a nursing home. The building remained abandoned until 1992, when it was reopened as a mall called the Carriage House. It has since been used as a paranormal research center and gives paranormal tours to this day. Apparitions have been seen in the windows by people outside of the building, as well as by those inside the building. The apparition of a man who was once one of the tallest men alive, who lived his life in the asylum. Unexplained noises are heard in the building, including cries, screams, and laughter. Phantom conversations have been heard, as well as reports of being touched by cold hands. Other activity includes doors and windows opening and closing on their own, shadow figures, objects moving on their own, light issues, and mysterious knocks. And of course, the most haunted place in the United States is Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Both the town itself and the location of the battlefield are alleged to be haunted. Well, this could either be the longest posting on the group or a very concise description of the battle. So this person is posting this information. I'm going to go for the concise version. If you want to see a detailed description of the movements of both armies on all 3 days, there are many websites which will give you this. The Battle of Gettysburg was fought near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania between July 1st through the 3rd of 1863 and has been said to be the turning point of the U.S. Civil War. Two things are certain: it was the battle with the most casualties in the war, and it halted General Lee's Confederate advance into the North, or Union. It certainly heralded the end of the war with a Union victory, although even after the Gettysburg loss, it has been said there were still many chances for Confederates to turn the tide back and win the war. Either way, the Battle of Gettysburg went a long way to reuniting the United States instead of leaving two radically different and probably hostile countries in southern North America. Legends of Gettysburg Phantom Smells. The streets and surrounding area of Gettysburg were filled with dead and dying men during and after the battle. Residents of this town had to use peppermint and vanilla-soaked handkerchiefs to relieve the horrid stenches. Apparently Vicks was not known back then. People still claim to catch the smells of death, as well as vanilla and peppermint, in the air today. The Farnsworth House Inn. Confederate sharpshooters took over this house during the battle to fire on Union troops on Cemetery Hill, just over 100 yards away. Union forces also used the structure as a headquarters after the battle. It is now run as a bed and breakfast and still has the original floors and walls with just over 100 bullet holes in them. The following paranormal activity has been reported at this site. When the attic is quiet and empty, a harp can be heard. Phantom footsteps are heard on the staircase and the main floor. Ghosts sit on beds, apparitions are seen, and shadows pass before people in the dining room. An apparition of an older woman is seen in the hallway between the tavern and the kitchen. The Jenny Wade House and Museum, originally a double-unit residence, and Jenny Wade and her sister rented half of the house during the battle. They were warned to leave as their home was in the middle of the battle. They refused and stayed to bake bread and give water to the Union soldiers. Jenny was accidentally shot to death by a Confederate sharpshooter in the Farnsworth attic. The following paranormal activity has been witnessed at this location. The apparition of a young woman has been seen, followed by the scent of baking bread and rose-scented perfume. On the second floor, children from an orphanage that was once nearby and played in the house have been known to hang from the chains in roped-off areas. They also called out a friendly "hey" to passers-by and sometimes grab ankles or hands of the living tourists. A male ghost haunts the upstairs and is surrounded by the smell of cigar smoke and has even dropped ashes on guests. How nice. Cemetery Hill. Sounds of Civil War-era music are being played there. Apparitions of Civil War soldiers, phantom voices, bangs, and other unexplained noises. Feelings of being watched, hunted, and not being wanted. Light issues and mysterious mist. Phantom touches, shoves, and pulls. Devil's Den. This is the site of vicious and heavy fighting on the second day of the battle. Sounds of battle are heard in this location, as well as problems with any cameras or video equipment. The reason for this is rumored to be that a famous photographer, Alexander Gardner, was in this area taking pictures right after the battle. Upon seeing a perfect place for a photo, he got his assistants to drag a dead Confederate soldier to that spot and took his famous photo. Apparently the soldier was not happy this happened and now wreaks havoc with cameras. The Daniel Lady Farm. Used by the Confederates as a field hospital, many soldiers suffered their final moments here. The ghosts of General Isaac Ewell and his 10,000 corpse are said to haunt this place. The Cashtown Inn. This location is 8 miles from the town of Gettysburg and the site of first death in the battle. Photos of orbs and skeletons have been taken at this location, as well as numerous sounds of thumping doors, lights turning themselves on and off, and doors locking and unlocking on their own. The Ghost Train. The only ghost tour that takes guests across the actual battlefield. The smell of cigar smoke and apparitions of soldiers have been smelt and seen over the battlefield and near the tracks. And lastly, Gettysburg College. The oldest building on the campus was used as a hospital during the battle. 2 administrators at the college were working late one night in the 1980s on the 4th floor. Upon taking the elevator down, it failed to stop on the main floor and instead took them to the basement. When the doors opened, they were greeted by a full scene of a Civil War era hospital in vivid color, and one of the soldiers even looked up and met their gaze. Moving on to Reflection Corner now, let's go to something a little bit more positive. We have today's Readings and Responsorial Psalm. The reading for today is taken from the first book of Samuel, chapter 1, verses 9 through 20. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy maidservant, and remember me, and not forget thy maidservant, but will give to thy maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, How long will you be drunken? Put away your wine from you. But Hannah answered, No, my lord, I am a woman sorely troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your maidservant as a base woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition, which you have made to him. And she said, Let your maidservant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her countenance was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked him of the Lord. Your responsorial psalm today is not taken from the Psalms. It's taken from the same book that we just read. Sometimes they base their responses on the readings extremely. And this responsorial psalm is from the first book of Samuel, chapter 2, verses 1 and 4 through 8. And I will use the refrain, I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. Hannah also prayed and said, My heart exalts in the Lord, my strength is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. Your gospel for today is from Mark 1, verses 21 to 28. And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, Be silent, and come out of him. And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, What is this? A new teaching. With authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. We have 4 saints today to talk about, and the first one isn't even a saint yet. He's just a blessed. Blessed Peter Donders was a missionary born in Tilburg, Netherlands on October 27, 1809. He came from a modest and religious family of weavers. His father died when he was young, which forced him to get a job and earn money to support his mother. Early on, he decided to become a priest, but he could not go to school or commit himself to learning, so this plan had to wait. Eventually, when his family's monetary situation improved, Peter Donders was able to approach the Capuchin, Camaldose, and Redemptorist orders for entrance. However, he lacked education, and the order's superiors believed it was too late to make up for this lack. Despite this, Peter Donders did not give up. He took a job as the doorman in a seminary. He worked during the day and studied at night with the help of a priest who befriended him. He completed school as a part-time student. At last, he was ordained at the age of 32. A year later, he asked to be sent on a mission to South America. Father Peter was sent to Suriname, where he worked on an island for lepers, Batavia. He was welcomed with joy and surprise. For 34 years, he served the sick with medical assistance, spiritual support, and everyday life advice, and preached the gospel to local village residents. In 1867, he made his monastic vows. Peter Donders died on January 14, 1887, in Suriname, and was buried here. In 1982, Pope John Paul II counted him among the blessed. In his footsteps, Peter Donders carried out missionary work with great zeal. He opened up people's hearts to God. He brought them the gospel and solace for their souls. The Society of the Catholic Apostolate, or Pauline Fathers, is a community that fulfills the apostolic mission in St. Joseph's Parish in Chelmno. Not the goods of the world, but God. Not riches, but God. Not honors, but God. Not distinction, but God. Not pride, but God. Not advancement, but God. God always and in everything. These are the words of the community's founder, St. Vincent Pallotti, who wanted to spread the faith and deepen people's religious experiences. In order to fulfill the order's mission, they operate a Catholic school along with an adult education center. The Fathers work for the unity of Christians, following their founder's example. Next, we have Nino of Georgia. Nino is the patroness of Georgia, not the state, the country. Nino was a slave who was taken to the kingdom of Georgia early in the 4th century. She impressed others with her purity and devotion to God. One day, a mother brought her sick child to Nino and asked for her help. Nino took the child, wrapped it in her cloak, and invoked the name of Christ. When she gave the baby back to its mother, the child was healed. Soon, other sick people were flocking into Nino, seeking to be cured. The Queen of Georgia heard of Nino's miraculous powers and called her to the palace to treat an ailment. Nino refused, saying that as a slave she was not worthy to go to the palace. So the queen came to Nino. Once again, Nino wrapped her patient in her cloak and prayed to God. The queen was cured. When the queen offered Nino her thanks, the devout girl insisted that it was Christ who deserved the praise, not her. The king tried to reward Nino by sending her gold and silver, but she returned it all. All Nino wanted was for the royal couple to embrace Christianity. The king was reluctant until he found himself lost in the woods one day, according to tradition, and promised to convert if God would help him find the path home. The mist that had been covering the forest suddenly disappeared, and the king returned safely. He and his wife then asked Nino to teach them her faith, and they indeed converted. The royal couple promoted their newfound religion throughout their kingdom. As a result, Nino was sometimes called the Apostle of Georgia. In her footsteps, Nino generously used the healing powers and sought nothing in return. Today, many doctors, nurses, and other health practitioners similarly donate their skills to help the less fortunate. One group that provides free medical aid is Doctors of the World USA. Founded in 1990, Doctors of the World has a broad mission, including to relieve suffering and improve health among vulnerable populations, to develop medical care practices that enhance respect for human dignity, and to encourage other healthcare professionals to volunteer their services to undeserved populations. In the United States, Doctors of the World has a special focus to provide medical aid to asylum seekers who were victims of torture in their homelands. The doctors treat both physical wounds and psychological trauma and prepare medical affidavits to help their patients gain asylum. To help ease the suffering of others by donating to Doctors of the World, call 888-817-HELP, which is 888-817-4357. Next, we have Hilary of Poitiers. Saint Hilary of Poitiers is the patron of children with learning disabilities. Hilary of Poitiers was born at a fateful time in the history of the Church. When he was still a child, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, and new doors were opened for young Hilary, who was born in Poitiers, France. Although he had been born of rich pagan parents, Hilary was intrigued by the scriptures, and he decided to learn more about the word of the Lord. After a long, hard study that continued for many years, he became a believer in Jesus Christ. Hilary was married and had children, but the level of his faith was such that he was named Bishop of Poitiers. At first, He did not want the position. His humility and reluctance to accept the post, however, only increased the admiration people had for him, and eventually he accepted. During this time, a heresy called Arianism was gaining hold among many, including the Emperor Constantinus. The Arians believed that Christ was not God's son, but rather a semi-divine, semi-human creation. To counter any criticism of the Arians, Constantinus summoned his bishops to defend the heresy. Those who refused, including Hilary, were banished. This did not stop Hilary from defending the concept of the Trinity. After 3 years, the emperor reluctantly allowed Hilary to return to Poitiers, where he was received with great joy. When Constantinus died the following year, Hilary was free to set the church in order. He even shamed one prominent Arian into confessing the divinity of Christ in a public forum. 7 centuries later, Hilary's life would be the defining inspiration for the great Irish evangelist Malachi, who later became a saint. In his footsteps, Hilary is the patron saint of children with learning disabilities. Today, there are schools dedicated to serving those children with special needs. The Winston School of San Antonio, Texas, is one such school. Named for the British statesman Sir Winston Churchill, who overcame multiple learning problems to become a great leader, the Winston School fosters an atmosphere of mutual respect, self-esteem, and acceptance of differences. The Winston program features multi-sensory approaches to teaching, which means they focus on the senses: touch, sight, smell, sight, etc. Computer-aided instruction, extracurricular activities, and individualized instruction, which means each student gets a special program just for him or herself. With a 5-acre campus on the ground of the South Texas Medical Center, Winston's programs also provide training courses for healthcare and education professionals. The Winston School offers children who may typically be outcasts a chance to learn in a loving atmosphere and become contributing members of society. Pray for the people who provide extra attention to those in need. Our last saint today is Saint Sava of Serbia. Sava of Serbia was the first bishop of Serbia and is the patron of Serbs. Born in 1174, Savia was the youngest son of Prince Stephen I of Serbia, a ruler who won independence for Serbia from the Byzantine Empire. Drawn to a spiritual life rather than politics, Sava became a monk in 1191, when he entered a monastery on Mount Athos in Greece at the age of 17. In 1198, his father abdicated the throne and joined Sava at the monastery. Together, father and son founded Kalandari, a monastery for suburban monks on Mount Athos that is still active today. In 1206, Sava returned to Serbia to settle a dispute among his brothers regarding their inheritance. For the next 25 years, Sava worked hard to convert Serbians, many of whom worshiped pagan gods. To train Serbian priests, Sava established a monastery of Studencija, as well as other smaller monasteries. He also traveled to Nicaea to persuade the Byzantine Emperor Theodore II and the Eastern Patriarch Germanus I to appoint a bishop for Serbia, a move that would strengthen the position of the Serbian Church. In 1219, Savia was ordained the first bishop of Serbia. As bishop, Sava commissioned the translation of Orthodox Christian teachings from the Greek into Serbian, and also wrote 2 monastic rules. His untiring efforts to organize the church were largely responsible for reforming religious life in Serbia. Later in life, he made several pilgrimages to Jerusalem. He died on January 14th of 1237 in Bulgaria as he was returning from the Holy Land. In his footsteps, several Latin calendars refer to Sava as Praesbyter, which is the enlightener, a healing figure. Thus, it was natural that the head of the Serbian Church, Patriarch Pavel, should look to Savia's example when in 1999 he sought to mend relations between the warring Serbian and Albanian people. The Church must condemn all atrocities that are committed, no matter what the faith or origin of the person committing them may be, Pavel has said. To seek peace, Patriarch Pavel sent envoys to Washington, D.C. and to the peace talks in Rambouillet, France, calling for a peaceful solution to the conflicts in Bosnia and Kosovo. Called for the resignation of Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, and moved from Belgrade to Pec in Kosovo to personally begin the process of reconciliation between Serbs and Kosovan Albanians. The work of Patriarch Pavel reminds us that Christ's word is eternal and urgently needed in a secular world that is searching for spiritual guidance. Today's closing prayer comes from the prayer of the Serbian Patriarch. O guide of orthodoxy and blessed teacher of virtues, purifier and enlightener of thy homeland, beauty of monastics, most wise Father, holy Sava, by the teaching thou didst enlighten thy people, O flute of the Spirit, pray to Christ God for our souls. Amen. This week's Fan of the Week is my sister Susan. It is fun to have her as a Fan of the Week again for the first time in 2014. The answer to this week's question was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and actually produced a fair amount of participants, although my sister was the quickest. I will be posting the question for next week's episode on Saturday this week, so keep your peepers open for a new question. Thank you for sticking with me. I'm sorry this was long, and I will see you next week.